K.W. Krieger presents The Obscura Dossier, Episode 18, Tethered. Statement of Eleanor Kent regarding her involvement with the Veridian Dawn and their practices. Statement given June 14th, 2019. Statement begins. I didn't go looking for them. Not really. I found them when the summer before last at Groovathon Rising, a music festival that was more Woodstock than punk. It was a week-long festival of barefoot dancing and bad vegetarian curries. I was walking back from the fire circle one morning, still drunk and honestly probably a little high from all of the smoke that just permeated through the air. I could still hear the large crowds of people dancing and stomping to the beat of the drums in the distance. But that was when I saw them, this loose ring of people sitting cross-legged in the grass. Their faces all turned east. Nobody spoke, nobody smiled, but the silence around them was heavier than the music still booming from the stages. I honestly thought they were stoned. Most people were. But one of them handed me a square of dark glass and, without looking at me, and gestured towards the sun just beginning to crawl above the tree line. I didn't hold it up and I didn't look, but I slipped it into my pocket and walked away. However, I felt something pull at me to stay, as if I was being almost invited. That whisper of belonging you hear when you've been lonely long enough. I had lost a lot by then. My marriage, my family, the friends who had been split down the middle in the divorce. Grief that felt like a hollow house. You live in it, but it doesn't feel like home. I wanted someone to say I could stay. And they did, in their own way. I eventually learnt that they called themselves the Veridian Dawn. I don't think it ever occurred to me until long after that it was a cult. Like, we don't worship, we witness, and it was more like a sunrise club, if anything, a place for the strays to gather before the day began. It felt very new age hippie, but at that point, it was what I needed to make the days go by easier. At first, it was just watching, the hush of a group standing together at dawn, cups of herbal tea steaming in the cold. I remember the feeling of being folded into a silence that wasn't mine, and the warmth of it. It was easy to mistake that for love, easy to mistake the stillness for safety. It was only later that I noticed the words that they used, not sunrise, but attention, not light, but presence. They said it casually as if it were interchangeable, but I could feel the difference, even if I didn't believe it yet. I told myself I was only there because I was tired of eating breakfast alone. And after the festival, I thought I'd forget them, just another oddity from a weekend of oddities. But a few weeks later, I found one of the women from that morning. Mara, I later learned her name was, outside a co-op market. She recognized me before I recognized her, smiled and said, "You never used the glass." I hadn't told anyone about that, and I still had it. I think I slipped it into a drawer with the ticket stubs and wristbands. She invited me to a gathering, just a small one. She promised that there was no pressure and no expectations. It was Sunday, just after dawn, in the park by the canal. Maybe a dozen of them, The same silence as the festival, but here without the backdrop of bass and smoke. It felt heavier, more intentional. They didn't face each other, they didn't hug or joke. They stood shoulder to shoulder looking east, waiting. I joined the line because I didn't want to look like I didn't belong. It was that simple, a choice made out of politeness. And that's how it began. One Sunday blurred into another. They pass around mugs of bitter tea, spiced with something that I could never really identify, and they didn't talk much, at least not during the watching. Afterwards, though, they'd share food, sit on blankets, swap scraps of photocopies, reading old myths and strange diary entries, news clippings about blindness, burn marks, and firestorms. Always things involving the sun. Always at the edges of human suffering. They called it proof. I told myself it was campfire storytelling dressed up as some new age hippie revolution, and honestly, I didn't really care. I just wanted the companionship and a place I felt that I belonged. I should have left when the rules began. Though they were never called rules, but you learned quickly what was and wasn't allowed. No artificial light before dawn, no sunglasses on watching days, curtains had to stay open, mirrors turned towards the wall. They spoke of letting it find you. The iris, they said, with casual reverence, as though the sun wasn't a star, wasn't this burning gas giant, but was a presence capable of turning towards or away from us. When they said attention, I felt the word cling to me as if sticky and strange, as if it wasn't just the act of looking. It just didn't feel right. And yet, I kept going. Because I had no one else. Because when they sat in that circle after the silence and offered me bread, I felt, for a few minutes, like I had a family again. Even if the family was borderline worshipping the sun. For months, I kept up the rhythm, sunrise on Sundays, reading nights twice a month, where Mara would hand out materials, old snippets, fragments from forgotten corners of history, a medieval bishop who claimed the sun bled during eclipses, a Victorian woman's letter warning mothers never to let their children nap in sunlight lest their dreams be swallowed. Each one delivered with that serene smile as though it were only trivia, only amusement. But we all knew the weight of it, even if we didn't say it aloud. By March, they began speaking of the retreat. Not in detail at first, just a promise. A weekend together, away from the city, free of charge. A gift, Mara said, for those who have stayed faithful. The words made me bristle. I didn't think of myself as faithful. I told myself I didn't believe what they believed. But when the invitation came, handwritten and slid into my bag when I wasn't looking, I didn't throw it away. I didn't even hesitate. A cabin in the hills, a few days of silence and company, who would refuse? The retreat was scheduled for July. They mentioned almost as an afterthought that it coincided with an eclipse, a moment of unveiling, Mara called it, with that same gentle tone she used for everything. I laughed it off, but my stomach twisted even then. The retreat was in the hills, far from anything. They had rented a lodge, 3 floors of creaking wood and wide windows, surrounded by pine and silence. We arrived Friday evening, 20 of us in all. The circle felt larger suddenly, as if it had only been a fraction revealed to me before. Some had traveled from other cities, other countries, a quiet network all folding into one another like nesting dolls. No one spoke much the first night. We just shared food, set out mats, drifted off to sleep in the warm hush of nature. Saturday was all stillness. No phones, no music, no chatter. Mara called it clearing. We walked the woods in pairs. We fasted from noon, and the air carried that sharp tang of pine sap mixed with a strange, watchful tension that sat on the skin like static. I tried to ask one of the men, a broad, soft-spoken fellow named Peter, what exactly we were preparing for, but he only smiled and said, to be present. It was maddening, like asking a question to only be answered by a riddle. And then Sunday came. The circle rose before dawn and filed into the clearing at the edge of the woods, where the trees opened onto a stretch of grass and sky. A ring of stones had been arranged in advance as if this had been done before. We sat on the ground, backs straight, a rough circle. The air was cool, damp, smelling of pine and dew. But beneath that, there was something else. A tautness, a hum, as though the world itself were bracing. This presence that we were preparing for would come at noon. So we waited. Hours of silence. Hours of turning our faces skyward, eyes downcast behind what I thought was welder's glass. Some murmured under their breath, not words exactly, but more humming. It was low and constant, like bees in a wall. I didn't join. I couldn't. My skin itched with unease, but I stayed because leaving felt impossible, as if the circle had tethered itself to me. When the moment came, it was slow. I don't know if we had something to do with this, or if it was perfectly timed, but the moon began creeping across the sun, biting away the light. Shadows sharpened, bent strange across the ground. The air around us cooled unnaturally fast. All of the birds fell silent. The world was a photograph, drained of sound and warmth. We held our breath together. An unspoken command. And then it blinked. The sun blinked. I don't know how else to describe it. In a moment when the moon was perfectly positioned in front of the sun, it looked like an iris, and the sun just swallowed it in a smooth, unwavering moment that looked as if the sun itself had blinked. The glass cracked in my hand, a hairline fracture spiderwebbing the pane. I should have looked away, but I didn't. I looked directly, bare-eyed for the first and only time, and what I saw was not absence, not a disk obscured, but an eye, a vast, molten iris rimmed with fire, staring out from behind the mask of the moon. It fixed on me. Not us. Me. I felt a pressure in my head like a vice. The tendrils came then. I know they're meant to be coronal flares, arcs of plasma reaching into space, but I swear to you they moved with intent, curling and uncurling, twitching like fingers. Groping in the dark, one brushed the shadowed edge of the moon, as though testing the barrier, tasting it, and all the while that eye bore into me. The heat wasn't on my skin, it was inside me, peeling me open, thought by thought, memory by memory. Every moment of grief, every hollow space in me, stripped bare and examined. I understood then. The sun does not simply shine. It does not simply fall upon us by accident. It chooses. Every second of every day, it chooses to pour itself across this world. And if it can choose to give, it can choose to stop. Or worse, it can choose to take. The circle cried out then, not in fear, but ecstasy. They knelt, some with faces pressed to the dirt, some with arms thrown wide. Their voices rose into a single, trembling hum, vibrating in my bones. But I could not join them, because I could feel it in me, prying, testing. My eyes streamed with tears that scalded. My hands clenched until nails cut my palms. Still, I could not look away. And then, as the moon slid on and the eye closed, the world exhaled. The light returned, sharp and ordinary. But I knew it was not ordinary. Not anymore. I had seen it. After the eclipse, the circle did not speak for a long time. We sat in the clearing, some trembling, some swaying with faint smiles on their faces. Mara finally stood and told us to return to the lodge. No one spoke of what we'd seen. Not directly. We moved as though we were sleepwalking, packed our things in silence, and left before sunset. I remember looking back at that field and seeing the darkened circle of stones. For a moment, it seemed like the grass inside was scorched, a shade too dark. I never checked if it was real. In the weeks that followed, I tried to stop going. Truly, I did. But the circle found me. A message slipped into my mailbox. We gather. A knock at my door just before dawn. We're waiting. They didn't need to say what for. I'd lie awake until sunrise, heart hammering, and then find myself walking the streets with no real choice in the matter, joining them in the park as though pulled by a string. I told myself I was still free, that I could stop any time. But each Sunday I was there. They were different after the retreat, all of them. Their eyes caught the light too easily, gleaming faintly, unnervingly, like candle flames reflected in glass. At first, I thought it was imagination, then one morning Mara turned her head and the sun caught her iris, and for the briefest instant it glowed. Not orange, but molten, like a coal about to flare. I nearly cried out, but no one else seemed alarmed. They simply hummed their low, wordless tune as if in agreement. Food became less important to them. I watched Peter push away a full plate at one of the post-watch breakfasts. "I'm full," he said, though he hadn't touched it. The others nodded as though it made sense. After that, more and more of them began to fast, skipping meals entirely. Their skin grew pale and taut, but their eyes burned brighter. They were being fed already. I realized, fed by what had seen us, and the humming, it never stopped. At first, it was only during gatherings, a soft undercurrent beneath the silence, but soon it crept into everything. I'd catch it under their breath in the queue at the market, on the bus, even during conversations, a vibration that didn't match their lips, like the sound was being drawn through them from somewhere else. It made my bones ache when I stood too close. I avoided them where I could, but they always found me, always knew where I'd be. as though my own shadow told them. For me, the change was different. I could not sleep past sunrise. No matter how hard I tried, the light pierced through curtains, blinds, shutters. It always found a way in. The first touch of morning would creep across my face and drag me awake. No matter how exhausted I was, I learned quickly that the light is patient. You can cover your windows, you can shut yourself away, but it only needs the smallest crack, the thinnest seam to enter. And once it enters, it stays. Worse were the dreams. They came every night after the eclipse. Dreams of standing on the surface of the sun, though I was not burned. Vast plains of plasma roared around me, rivers of fire twisting like living things, snapping and curling like whips. And in the center of it all was the eye, lidless, endless, staring. A voice without words pressed into my skull, heavy as gravity, saying, "Look at me. Look and be unmade." I would wake gasping, sheets drenched. The afterimage of that eye burned into me as if I'd stared at it too long. But I hadn't. Not in waking life, only in the dream. Only in the dream. The circle grew thinner, stranger. They moved through the world like figures of ash that hadn't blown away yet. They smiled more often, but it wasn't joy, it was recognition, as if they were already looking past me, past all of us, towards something waiting just above. I stopped attending eventually. I forced myself to, but it didn't matter. The light followed. The feeling of being observed never left. You cannot close your eyes against something that shines through every eyelid, every wall, every skin. Once the sun has noticed you, there is nowhere to hide. It has been months now since the retreat, and I have not stood with them again, but I still wake before dawn every day without fail. The light seeps in no matter what I do. Curtains drawn, blinds shut, windows boarded. It waits at the seams. It strokes my eyelids, slips down my throat. I taste sunlight even in the dark. I thought distance would help, that if I cut myself off, if I ignored their invitations, if I walked away, I could forget. But how do you walk away from the sky? How do you turn your back on something that rises no matter what you do? You cannot. I know that now. The circle no longer frightens me. They are only ahead of me. They've already accepted what I still fight. They are being remade, slowly into something the sun has chosen, and when it chooses fully, when it decides to turn its face towards us without looking away, it will not matter whether I stood in that clearing or not. It will not matter what I believe. It will not matter what any of us do. We were raised to think of the sun as a giver of warmth, of life. But no one asks what it means that we go blind if we stare too long. No one asks why it lashes out with fire that can swallow whole worlds. No one asks whether light is kindness or merely indifference that happens to keep us alive. We worshipped because we were afraid to name it for what it is. Not benevolence, not love, just presence. Endless, burning presence. The next eclipse is coming. I don't know what it will show us this time. Perhaps another eye. Perhaps a mouth. Perhaps nothing at all, but I know one thing. When it chooses to open itself again, it will not close. Not until it has taken what it wants. And there is nowhere to run. No cave, no coffin, no grave deep enough to hide us from its gaze. We are all already beneath it, pinned in place like insects under glass. It does not matter that I never believed. Belief is nothing. The sun is. It was before us, and it will be after. We are only here because it has allowed it. And one day, maybe soon, maybe not, it will decide we are not worth the attention anymore. On that day, the light will stop, and we will understand what it means to be seen. Statement ends. According to security, shortly after Miss Kent documented her statement, she stood in the lobby and began screaming before, shortly thereafter, gouging her eyes out and holding them toward the sky. Jesus. Eyewitnesses to this event recall her saying things about escaping the light into the eternal darkness where no light can touch her. She was shortly restrained and has since been placed under supervised care at Sanctuary Meadows Psychiatric Institution. On to the statement given. There is little to verify Eleanor Kent's account. The Circle of Dawn appears in scattered reports from alternative lifestyle festivals and wellness retreats, though they are rarely identified as a formal organization. Their numbers do seem small but consistent, certainly not enough to draw out outside scrutiny. Her descriptions of the eclipse align with known astronomical records for the dates provided, and the coronal flares that she notes are unremarkable in themselves, though the language she uses suggests she perceived them as animate. Hallucination is possible, or collective suggestion, but her insistence on being singled out, seen, is harder to dismiss. It has the texture of conviction and not invention. This case is being filed under H-1199-Delta. Classification: biophoric entity / cognitohazard. Status: active, recurring, sentient. Disinformation risk. Priority: high. End recording. The Obscure Dossier is a podcast created by K.W. Krieger, licensed under a Creative Commons Non-Attribution Non-Share-alike 4.0 international license. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow us on Reddit at The Obscure Dossier, like us on Facebook, and as always, thanks for listening.